So it's October. We're out in Mountain View Cemetery to tell a few stories of some of the people buried here that'll give a sense of our community, but also being October, some of my favorite stories that fit the October autumn mood. I couldn't help but start with one of our mayors, William Duncan Livingston Hardy. Mayor Hardy served from 1913 to 1927. He told the media they would not be welcome in council chambers to hear meetings because they weren't publishing what he wanted them to say, so he threatened to censor them. He also considered not only being mayor, but making himself police chief at the same time. But you have to remember, this was during the commission time when the mayor basically was the city manager and everything, because it's before the city manager period, and he was the only mayor during that period. So he was a bit of a dictator during that time when you look back at the history. But one of the more interesting parts, as we're standing here in October, he was also very much into spirituality. He read horoscopes, created horoscopes, and here is the mayor of Lethbridge at the time, and he wrote horoscopes for William Lyon Mackenzie King, the prime minister of the time. So our mayor and the prime minister were sharing horoscopes and talking about spirituality, and so a piece of politics you might not expect. George Edwards came to Lethbridge from England around 1912. When the First World War started in 1914, he signed up and he served with the 31st Battalion in the First World War. When he returned back to Lethbridge, he went to work for the city, and for a very long time he was the superintendent in Galt Gardens. Working for the city, 1945, we're back in the Second World War, we have a labor shortage. So one of the jobs he had during the Second World War was working here in the cemetery. And he actually was a grave digger here in the cemetery. And while digging a grave in the cemetery in 1945, he suffered a heart attack and actually died here in the cemetery and is buried here in Mountain View where he worked. This cemetery at Mountain View dates from 1901, and we're in the oldest section. We're in Block 1, which is the old Anglican part. But if you're an eagle-eye viewer as you go through, you'll find some graves that have dates older. Sometimes because bodies were moved, like graves were moved, sometimes for various other reasons depending on one. So we have here 1889 Alfred Perry, who was buried in a 1901 cemetery. But he's here in the mounted police section of the cemetery for a reason. Alfred Perry came west and went to work for the mounted police. A year into his service, he is wanting to cross the river here by Lethbridge. It is spring, and one of the ranchers tells him, please don't cross the river, spend the night, etc. But he thinks he knows better. He goes out, he crosses the river. His horse flips him over in the river, and he is unfortunately drowned. His body is found, and he is brought into town for burial. But you have to remember, we have St. Patrick's Cemetery, an older cemetery. He is buried, but then when they're putting him out the police area here, we know they put up the monument. We also believe they moved him. We haven't confirmed that, but we believe he is buried here. So look for the dates, and you'll find sometimes there's interesting stories. One of the fascinating parts about this is the horse. Another rider was crossing the river on that horse, and they tried to flip him as well. They realized they had a horse that did not like water. So not only should you listen to old ranchers, don't cross rivers when you're not supposed to, but know the horse you're crossing the river on. So since we started with Mayor Hardy, we're going to end with somebody who had a bit of a dislike for him, politically speaking. But first we're going to start with Sadie Lovering, who is Dr. Lovering's wife. Dr. Lovering is right here behind me, and over here is Bessie Lovering, his second wife. I always joke, if you want the best headstone, marry a doctor and die before him, because there's some really nice headstones for the first wives of doctors in the cemetery. Second wives didn't get usually as nice. One of the interesting things, of course, Sadie's name and everything is on this side, but on the back you'll see the epitaph, and she has the longest epitaph here in Lethbridge with this long poem on the back of her headstone. I get to read a lot of newspapers, and like I said, Lovering and Hardy really were political enemies, and the slings and arrows that they wrote to each other through the Lethbridge Herald are quite fascinating to read. These guys are in every debate. They ran against each other. Lovering ran for mayor. He was an alderman. He was a advisory commissioner when Hardy was mayor, but the two really did have some fascinating arguments, and they're all kept there in the Herald for us. So if you ever want to get into a political debate from 100 years ago, that's where you go look. Now, here in the cemetery, we found the graves because we knew where they were, so we were finding them. But if anybody is looking for somebody in the cemetery, of course you go to the cemetery office. And when we walk through the cemetery, you probably noticed how beautifully maintained it is. It's mowed, the trees are looking amazing. Thank you to the cemetery who let us come out here and who maintains this and our other cemeteries in Lethbridge so beautifully for us.